Good evening, Husky fans. Thank you for tuning in to the 25th episode of Husky Dash. I'm your host, Nathan Mathisen, and today I'm going to be starting off the show by breaking down the defensive backs position group at UW. Now, this is going to be a segment that I'll be continuing for the next several weeks until I've run out of positions. So that'll be about 7 or 8 weeks, depending on if I talk about the special teams. After talking Husky football, I'll transition back into basketball, looking at the disappointing last week's performance and looking ahead to next week's performance, which is looking like it's going to be a disappointment as well. Now, feel free to leave any comments or questions you have in the chat, and I'll do my best to respond to them. Before getting too in depth into the first topic, a bit of Husky news. This is both football news. So first piece of news is UW football is getting another transfer from a Texas school. This time it's Texas A&M pass rusher Jeremiah Martin. In his 3 seasons at Texas A&M, he played in 32 games. However, he only had 11 total tackles, 3 of which were for a loss, and he had 0 sacks. Now, this is a stark contrast from when he was in high school, coming out as a 4-star prospect. His senior year of high school, he had 47 tackles for a loss and 30 and a half sacks in his 16 games. His high school performance clearly helped make him that 4-star prospect. However, at Texas A&M, he never really showed that star potential. Hopefully at UW alongside ZTF, Savell Smalls, Ryan Bowman, and all those guys UW has at pass rushers, he'll be able to unlock the potential. Another bit of news is UW released their salaries for football coaches. John Donovan is the highest paid assistant coach, making $875,000. Well, Gregory is second at $800,000. And every assistant coach besides Scott Huff, who's making $700,000, will be seeing a rise in their salary during the 2022 financial year. Even though the salary pool for assistant coaches has continued the trend of declining, in 2019, the salary pool for assistant coaches at UW was $5.94 million. Last year in 2020, it was $5.15 million. And this year, it's only $4.89 million. So in the past 2 years, the athletic department has cut over $1 million from the assistant coach's salary pool. Now, getting into topic 1, the position preview. So this segment, I'm going to be looking at the defensive back position, which last year I would say pretty much everyone would agree with me was the best position group at UW. You had Elijah Molden leading the way, who was really a shutdown nickel corner. I mean, Molden is a great corner. He has great eyes, great hands. He's got great technique. He's able to play the zone defense as well as man-to-man defense. And he was also arguably the best run defending corner in college football, coming up at the attack of the point of the running back when he reached run. Now, one downside of Molden was that he wasn't always he's not the biggest guy by far, and he's also not the most athletic. So he could sometimes get beat on deep routes, but usually his technique was able to help him overcome these shortcomings. Now, he was a senior, so he won't be here next year, so that's going to be a big loss for this defensive backs group. And another corner who won't be here next year is Keith Taylor, who's also moving on to the NFL. Now, Taylor is an interesting case, as I never really feel like he reached his full potential here at UW. Now, don't get me wrong, I think he's a great corner, a good corner. He clearly has the measurables. He's 6'3" tall, so kind of the Kevin King body type. But really, he needed to improve his technique and work on his ball production. As although he had 10 pass deflections in his career at UW, he had 0 interceptions. So he was able to get to the point of the ball at the same time as the receiver often and knock it away. but he wasn't usually or ever really able to come away with it for himself. So those are really the only two losses this position group has faced from this offseason. And even with how big those losses are and how key those players were, I still think that this defensive backs group is going to be a good group going into next year. I mean, UW has a great history with a number of defensive backs coming out of here. You got Byron Murphy, Kevin King, Sidney Jones. I'm sure I'm forgetting someone. But I think that with the young guys they have coming in who developed last year, and really first off, just a guy to talk about for next year is Trent McDuffie, who Trent McDuffie, as a freshman in 2019, was named second team All Freshman All American by Pro Football Focus and was honorable mention for freshman Pac 12 Player of the Year. And now in 2020, in the shortened 4 game season, he did not disappoint either. He was named All Pac 12 second team, and his highlight from 2020 was the game sealing interception against Utah. Overall, he didn't have many stats, as quite frankly, teams avoided him. He wasn't thrown at that much as teams respected his game. Now, for the replacement for the other two starting jobs that were left in Taylor and Molden, one of the guys who will likely be plugged into one of those spots is Kyler Gordon. Last year, Gordon started one of the 4 games. He played in all 4. He was also a key guy on special teams last year as well as the year before. And Gordon is really just a guy that can play anywhere on the field. He can line up at safety, he can play at corner, he can play in the nickel, he can play all over on the defensive back. So, really, depending on what other guy shines in practice or training camp, Gordon will likely just be slotted in at that other spot, whether it's the outside corner opposite of Trent McDuffie or if it's the nickel corner taking Elijah Molden's role. As the two safety spots are pretty much already filled up with the pairing of Asa Turner and Alex Cook returning. And then you've also got Julius Irving likely getting some reps throughout the season. So really that leaves one depth chart or one open depth chart spot that needs to be filled out. And I look at it, it could be a number of different guys. It really all just depends on how they perform in practice leading up to the season and who the coaches like the most and who they think will be the most productive. Looking at the class of 2021 cornerbacks who came in, you've got Dyson McCutcheon and Zachary Spears. Neither one of those guys, I think, will really make an instant impact on this team, as both of them are 3 stars coming in. So they'll likely both redshirt this first year. 2 names that I would look at as maybe getting that last starting job that I'm giving out would be junior Dominique Hampton, as well as sophomore Cameron Fabikalanen, as those were the 2 guys that were behind Keith Taylor and Elijah Molden on the 2-man depth chart for the final game of the year against Stanford. So they clearly did stuff in practice that got the coaches to notice them. Now, another name to kind of keep an eye out for that would be Covington redshirted last year as a 4-star at high school, which Sagara High School is also the same high school that former Husky star cornerback and current NFL cornerback Byron Murphy went to, with Murphy also being a 4-star prospect out of there. So maybe Covington be the next Byron Murphy for you. Covington clearly has a nice size for a cornerback, 6'2", which is kind of that ideal, good size, but not too tall size. So overall, really this position group, the defensive backs, they're not a position group that I'd be too concerned about with their performance for next year. They seem to always be the strong point for this team, and really I expect more of that in the 2021 season. So now getting into my second topic, which that's going to be looking at the past performance for the men's Husky basketball team. There has been 1 week in the conference play for the Huskies where they didn't lose all the games. That was the 1 week they traveled to the mountain schools where they beat Colorado and Utah. Now, this week was more of all the other weeks where they lost both games. The Huskies traveled down south to the state beneath us, and they came back up north with no wins and 2 losses. So they first traveled to play Oregon State, and that was last Thursday. And really, that whole game was just a blowout. UW didn't really seem in it for the majority of the game. They ended up losing 71-91, and their defense was non-existent, and their offense was back to its old ways that it had been playing 3-4 weeks ago, where it's only shooting 25% from behind the arc. So on the last week's show, the key to this game, I said, was going to be UW having to stop Oregon State senior guard Ethan Thompson on offense. So let's look and see how he did. So first of all, Thompson is averaging 16 points, 3.5 rebounds, 4 assists per game, shooting 41%. Now in the game against UW, he hit his average for points spot on, scoring 16 points. He added 2 rebounds, 7 assists, shot 50%, and had 3 steals. The Huskies couldn't stop Thompson, and they couldn't beat him on the offensive end. Green at the guard spot had his worst game in a while. Now, Green is mighty undersized against Thompson, with Thompson being 6'5" and Green only being 6 feet tall, and that clearly affected Green, it appeared. It was hard for him to get passes past Thompson. And another thing that affected Green was that he got into early foul trouble, and he ended up never being able to find his offense. So Green really got into foul trouble from the tip. On Oregon State's first offensive possession, Green had a foul called on him, and then 4 or 5 minutes later, with 15 minutes to go in the first half, he had a second foul called on him and ended up being subbed out of the game. So he couldn't really get any sort of rhythm in his game to start off. And he ended up finishing the day shooting 1 for 7, 4 turnovers, only 2 assists, and 2 points. So that kind of stalled out Green with that foul trouble to start off and the pressure and defense that Thompson applied to him. Now, really looking at other Oregon State players besides Thompson who played great, really it's just the entire starting five for Oregon State was unstoppable. The Huskies couldn't do anything against them. The lowest point total on the starting five for Oregon State was 14 points. Oregon State's starting five combined for 81 of the 91 points that they scored. The starting five shot 55% from the field, while the whole team wasn't far behind them, shooting 49% and 46% from three. So really, the Huskies couldn't do anything on the defensive end or the offensive end of this game. And that's really disappointing to me, as quite frankly, I talked about this as being one of the few remaining games that I thought the Huskies could at least be competitive in. I thought that they might be able to pull off the win. Oregon State doesn't have the best record in the Pac-12. They're not one of the top teams in the Pac-12 like a lot of these teams. The Huskies finished last week against Oregon, one of the top teams, and both games this week are against some of the top teams in the Pac-12. So this was one of the more winnable games that UW had left on their schedule. And so losing this game and just coming out and playing the way they did play, it disappoints me. Now, even with how poorly the Huskies played and how poorly they shot, they still stayed in the game for the first 15 minutes of the game. Now, for the other 25 minutes of the game, they weren't in it all. They were really blown out. But for the first 15 minutes, by 5 minutes remaining in the first half, the Huskies were only down 3. Now, of course, they couldn't keep it this close at all or really for any longer, as by half they were down 12. and the deficit never really got any closer than 12. So the Huskies really have to play hard for a full 40 minutes in all their games or in each game if they want to be competitive. Now, even if they play hard for the full 40 minutes, there's no guarantee that they can even win the game as they've played hard for majority of games, but they still end up losing in the end. Now, against Oregon, UW played much better than against how they played Oregon State. Had UW played like they played against Oregon State, then I think they could have had a shot at beating the Beavers. Against Oregon, UW shot 51% from the field and 47% from deep, compared to the 25% from three they shot against OSU. Now, the shooting percentage numbers against Oregon were very similar to Oregon's numbers against UW. Oregon shot 49% from the field compared to UW's 51%, and 48% from deep compared to UW's 47%. However, even with this close shooting percentage, the Huskies still ended up losing by 12 points. And quite frankly, it could have been a lot worse had Green not caught fire towards the end of the second half. Green really got hot in the second half as he scored 21 of his 23 points in the fourth quarter. The Huskies were down 20 with 7 minutes to go in the game, and Green went on a nice run. Where at one point, I believe he scored about 9 straight points for the Huskies. So overall, Green had a great second half, but this kind of leads to what my take on this game was in the storyline. Hot shooting bursts followed by ice cold shooting bursts, or the other way around, as it is for Green. Because no matter how great you look at Green's stat lines at 23 points, in the first half, he only managed to score 2 points. You're not going to win a game when your best player is scoring 2 points in a half, no matter how great he plays in the second half. Another piece of this hot then cold is how the Huskies just started the game. They got out to an 18 to 14 point lead, but then they followed up that hot start with ice cold shooting. They went 1 for 8 on their next shots, and next thing you know, the Huskies aren't winning anymore. Really, the last time the Huskies saw a single point differential was with 18 seconds left in the first half when Sahonis made a layup, and it put them down only 8 points. Now, they couldn't even keep that differential going in the half as they allowed Oregon to get a nice 3-point shot, which they made. So they go into the half down 11. Something else that I want to point out is something that I pointed out in an episode a few times ago, and that's just Mike Hopkins' rotation. And it doesn't seem like Hopkins has an ideal rotation that he wants to use each game. It's really whatever he feels, I guess. And these 2 games this week are perfect examples of this. Against OSU, they ran a 9-man rotation. Jerron Brooks started as Hamir Wright came off the bench recovering from his thumb injury. Yet Jerron Brooks only got 8 minutes starting. Then you have Riley Sorn coming off the bench. He got 18 minutes of playing time. Nate Pryor got 1 minute. Eric Stevenson started as usual, and he played for 27 minutes. Now I'm going to compare that against their next game last week, which was against Oregon. And Jerron Brooks, who started against OSU, didn't touch the court against Oregon. Stevenson against Oregon played 7 less minutes. Sorn played 8 less minutes, and really, he seemed to be just subbed in for defense for 1 play and then subbed out, even though he was making an impact on the offensive end, shooting 3 for 3. Then Nate Pryor went from playing 1 minute against OSU to playing 12 minutes against Oregon. So really, just Hopkins' rotation has confused me for this whole year. I don't quite understand why Hopkins does this. Consistent roles and consistent minutes can help these players get in a better rhythm. Now, I can't wait to see these games this week, as I'm sure those minutes will be just as inconsistent as they've been for the rest or for the last part of the season. Now, moving on to the final topic. Now I'm going to be looking at the games the Huskies are playing this upcoming week. So, can the trend be stopped of the Huskies just losing? The answer to this is no. I mean, this week in all odds will be more the same, and one could easily say that their games this week are even tougher than last week's game, as they're going up against USC tomorrow night at 7, and then on Saturday, they have a game against UCLA. So, really, the one thing that's going to help UW in these games is I guess you could say they're at home, which the positive of that is they don't have to travel. But still, it's not like there's any fans giving you that home field or home court advantage. So looking at the opponents, USC is tied for the number one spot in the Pac-12 in the standings. And you look at who they're tied with UCLA. So this week, the Huskies are going to face the two best teams in the conference. How hard could that be, right? I mean, especially when you look at UW being the 11th ranked team in the standings at 2-10, I believe their overall record is. I mean, it's going to be a tough week for sure. Looking at how UW played UCLA in the earlier meeting, they surprisingly played them tough. I mean, they kept it close the whole way, but they weren't able to pull out the victory in the end, of course. And what really kept them in the first game was one of UW's rare shooting games. They shot 52% from the field, 44% from three. And you contrast that with UCLA, who only shot 41% from the field and 45% from three. UCLA made one less three-pointer than UW. I mean, that adds up to a close game. What lost UW that close game was the turnover discrepancy and the free throw discrepancy. Now, UW did have one of their better games in terms of how many turnovers they had. They only had 11, which is by no means a bad day. If you could have 11 turnovers in 40 minutes, I mean, that's not a bad day at all. You could win that game easily. However, you then look at UCLA's turnovers, and they only had 6. That's just very disciplined basketball if you're only giving 6 turnovers in 40 minutes of play. That's showing the difference between UW and UCLA. UCLA is a disciplined, well-oiled machine. Well, UW has its fair share of leaks and mistakes while they're on the court. Now, looking into the free throw discrepancy, that's something else that hurt UW in the previous meeting. UW only shot 10 free throws, and they only made 6. So they shot a putrid 60% from the free throw line. That's not good at all. You then look at UCLA, who shot 82%, going 14-17. That's a good free throw game. And so UW shot 10 compared to the 17, and UCLA made 8 more free throws than UW did. Now then look at that final score of 76-81. That's a 5-point loss only. You got a 5 turnover differential and a 8 free throw made differential. I mean, that clearly had a strong effect on the final score and how the game ended, especially looking at how UW actually shot better than UCLA did. If UW is going to come out on top this time around, they're going to have to clean up those errors in the turnovers and just make their free throws. UW's offense, it's tough to get to the free throw line, I think, with the offense they play, which that adds to the low free throw numbers they're shooting in all these games. As UW's offense is based around getting the ball to the open guy for a shot. The only players on UW who really ever spend time with the ball on the interior is Quade Green and Marcus Sahonis when they're driving in for a layup. However, when the Huskies are driving, or when these guys are driving to the bucket, if there's a big congestion of defense there, then they'll kick it out because there's the open guy for the three-point shot. They're not going to force something up and take the foul when they have a wide open guy for a three-point shot, even though the Huskies have not been shooting well from deep. Something else hurting the Huskies' free throw production is they don't have an Isaiah Stewart, a guy who is constantly in the post for the offense, battling it with the big men, taking contact, getting hits, and getting to the free throw line. So really, that's the struggle for them. They're not getting that contact and getting to the free throw line where they then can get free points, basically. All right, now taking a look at the game against USC, which is the game tomorrow. I don't see many ways that UW's going to be able to pull this one off. In their first meeting against USC pretty much had whatever they wanted. They controlled the offensive end and they controlled the defensive end. USC ended up winning that game 96-68. The defense for USC was hounding the Huskies and bottled up the Huskies' inconsistent offense the whole game. Huskies shot 38% from the field and 39% from deep. Quade Green was unable to get anything going as these USC guards on him were basically pressuring him from the time he stepped over the half court line. Green ended up going 2 for 11 with 5 points. Now, Bay and Stevenson were the lone bright spots, I guess you could say, from that game. They ended up shooting 6 for 12 from behind the arc, while everyone else on the Huskies combined for 3 for 13 from behind the arc. As for the Husky defense, they were really unable to stop USC or slow them down in any way, especially not the Mobley brothers, who are the best players on USC's team, in my opinion. Against UW, they combined to shoot 12 of 19, hauled down 9 boards, 7 assists, and had a total of 35 points. The Huskies can't really compete against size as they don't have much size. Roberts is really their best strong defensive player at 6'10", but behind him, you got Riley Sorn, who's a really tall guy at 7'4", but all these other guys can just outskill him in the post, and some of them can outmuscle him and get their hook shot, which Sorn can't block. So I've seen nothing since that game to believe that this one's going to turn out any way different. And really starting tomorrow against USC, the Husky basketball team is going to be in for a long few days with quite possibly very lopsided losses. I wouldn't be shocked if UW ended up losing both these games by 20 plus. But then again, you never know. UW could have a fluke win like it did against Colorado, where Colorado was ice cold and UW was fiery hot against them. So we're just going to have to wait and find out, I suppose, and hope for entertaining games, but don't be shocked if they're 2 blowouts. Now, that just about finishes up all the time I have for today. Once again, I'm Nathan Mathisen. You can follow me with the Twitter. You can follow me on Twitter with the @ that you see on screen right now. Now, I'm just a small part of the Dash Sports family. So if you'd like to meet the rest of the crew, check out our website, dashsports.tv. That's where you can find as many clips, quips, tips, rips, terrible jokes, and as many full episodes as you can stand, all in one place, all for free, dashsports.tv. I'll see you next week with more basketball news, as well as another Husky football position group breakdown. But for now, this is Husky Dash signing off. Thank you.